Okay, so we're going to talk quickly about our iteration structures or our loops, and then also talk about lists. So a loop is something that's going to repeat the code a certain number of times. So there's two types of loops that we have. The first is called a for loop, and it's often sometimes called a definite loop, in that we know how many times something should go through and iterate and loop through. So the easy way to set up in Python is we start with for, and then I have some placeholder, some variable. I can just call it I, is pretty traditional. I'm going to use a range. I'm going to go 0 to 5, and then I'm going to print I. So if we look at what that does, we see we get 0 through 4. If we look back and see kind of what we look at, if I print range 0 to 5, what I get is this list of numbers where 0 is included and 4 is not. So this is a non-inclusive end, an exclusive end there on the 5. But basically this will iterate through whatever we put in there. We can put a string, so I could put a computer, and then I will not be a number, but it will be each of those letters. I can add values to this. I can see anything that has that kind of structure that we can loop through it. Whether it's a list or a string that's iteratable, I can pull out those pieces with a for loop. And we'll look at an example in a minute of how we could use it. My other type of loop is going to be a while loop. So I can have a while loop, and this is often called an indefinite loop. And it has the same idea. We have a value that we start off, let's say x equals 0. And basically I'm going to say while x is less than 5, some condition that I have. So I can print x. What I have to do in this case, though, is I have to actively move x to break in that condition of being less than 5. So I have to make that false, or I can potentially get into an infinite loop, which is not good. So I need to add 1 to my value, and what I'll see is I get the number 0 through 4. And I could change that if I wanted. It could be plus 2, and then I get less values. If I changed it to plus 5, right, I'm just going to see that I get 1 value. So this has a little bit more kind of control over it in terms of how I move things forward. And I can make things with a while loop. I can use a value. So I could do something. If I was to try to make a game, I could say game on equals true. And I could basically say while game on. So while true, I need to ask some questions. So I could say answer equals input enter y to stop. And so I can make a condition on that. I can say if answer is equal to y, then game on is false. And otherwise, it's not going to do anything else. It should continue true and just ask me again. So I run it, and I didn't spell that right. So while game on, right, it says enter y to stop. If I hit no, it continues no. Capital N, yes. Until I hit capital Y, it's not going to stop that loop. So this is, again, it's an indefinite loop. I don't know how often it's going to run. But for all that being said, between the difference of them, I can often write equivalent loops. So let's say that I was trying to take a for loop, right? So if I have for I in range, the one we had before, 0 to 5, print I get this value 0 through 5, 0 through 4, sorry, print. And then if I was to do this the other way, I could say x equals 0 while x is less than 5, print x, and then x plus equals 1 is going to be an equivalent statement. So you can often go back and forth between the two. But in general, if you know how many times something's going to iterate, a for loop is going to be a better structure than a while loop. All right, so our second piece of this is lists. So a list is a container that can hold multiple things. So if I have something that's my list, I can set it with these square brackets, and I could say cat 1 false, and then 3.4. And then if I print my list, I'll see those values show up. Now, what's unique about a list in Python is this can change. So it can change its length. It also can hold different data types here. It's also iterable. So I could say for item in my list, and then print item And there we go. I get those values to come out. So there's methods on lists that you can use. If you look in the documentation, you will see that there's a bunch of them. If you look in, oh, sorry, it's taking a minute to load. What you'll see is there are methods here, so types and operations, lists. You have append, which is to add something to an end. You can insert in a position, you can remove an item, and you can pop an item at an index. So you can look through those. This takes an index. It'll pop the first thing, which is indexed as B. And then if you look at remove, let's say that I want to remove an actual value. I don't know the index. It'll take away that first one that's in there. So we can add something. So let's say I have my list, and then I do my list dot append dog, and then when I print it, my list, what we'll see is we've added that to the end, and then when we iterate through it, dog shows up as last one. We could insert an element at a given position, but append is usually helpful. So what's nice about Python lists is they can dynamically grow and shrink to accommodate things as needed, where other languages are a little bit stricter in terms of what their lists or arrays can do. Our final thing is kind of how we can use these. In general, we have, it's often helpful to find if we're looking for a sum or a max or a minimum value, we have some variable. So I'm just going to call it variable. Actually, let's be a little more specific. Let's say minimum. And I'm going to have a list of numbers. So I'm just going to say my list equals 2, 4, 1, -5, and then 6. And then I want to find the minimum value. Now, often what people do is set this to 0, but that could be incorrect if all my numbers are greater than 0. So I'm going to set the minimum to be my list. And then to get that element, we use our square brackets and then 0. And so what I want to do, if I want to figure out what the minimum value in the list is, I'm going to say for num in my list. And then I can manipulate this value based on iterating through it. So if num is less than the minimum, then that becomes a new minimum equals that num. All right, and then at the end, I could print minimum and then minimum. I'll add value at the end. So let's run through it. And there we go, -5. That works. If I make this -14, that should become the minimum, and it does. If this is positive and this is positive, then this is going to be 1, and it is, and it resizes. Now it's easy to see when we have these values here, where we have a relatively small list, we could scan through it. But if we had hundreds or thousands of values, then our computer is going to be much quicker than us going through it by hand. All right, so lots that you can do with loops and lists. Again, pay attention to getting into an infinite loop, and then also really looking at the documentation for lists in terms of how you can manipulate them. Often what you're looking for something to do is already going to exist and you don't have to recreate it. All right, good luck.